Your great-grandmother stood in her kitchen in 1903, rolling pasta dough so delicate that neighbors would gather at her door. They were curious about what magic she put into her dough.
This pasta is perfect, just like Grandma used to make.
It really is. The sauce is incredible, too.
These weren't store-bought. They cost under 50 cents and demanded the kind of technique that made nonnas legendary in their neighborhoods. Every Sunday dinner had them, every feast day, every wedding table. Then convenience replaced craftsmanship. The grandmothers died, their daughters bought jarred sauce from supermarkets, and 30 recipes that survived generations vanished within a decade. Today, you won't find a single one at your Italian restaurant. We're bringing them all back. Pasta e patate. Pasta and potatoes, the dish that kept families alive during the hardest winters in Little Italy. Maria Esposito made this every Monday night at her tenement on Elizabeth Street in 1903. She fed 8 people for 12 cents. The recipe came from her mother in Naples, who made it during the crop failures of the 1880s. You started with half a pound of ditalini pasta, 3 large potatoes cut into chunks, 1 onion diced fine, 2 tablespoons of lard, and 4 cups of water. You fried the onion in the lard until it turned golden. You added the potatoes and let them brown slightly. You poured in the water and let it boil. You added the pasta directly to the potato water and cooked everything together until the pasta released its starch, and the whole thing became creamy and thick. What made pasta e patate particularly important was that it taught immigrant children that poverty food could taste like comfort. It cost almost nothing. It filled you up. It reminded you of home. You could make it in 20 minutes on a coal stove. Ciceri e tria, half the pasta fried crispy, half boiled soft, all of it mixed with chickpeas in a dish from Puglia that almost nobody outside of Boston's North End still makes. Domenico Russo brought this recipe from Lecce to Boston in 1891. He made it every Friday at his boarding house on Hanover Street, feeding 12 men for 35 cents total. You soaked 1 pound of dried chickpeas overnight. You boiled them with water, salt, and a bay leaf until they were tender, which took about 2 hours. You made fresh pasta dough from 2 cups of flour and water, rolled it thin, and cut it into irregular strips. You fried half the pasta strips in olive oil until they were golden and crispy. You boiled the other half in the chickpea cooking water. You combined everything together, the crispy pasta, the soft pasta, the chickpeas, and the cooking liquid. What made Ciceri tria particularly special was the texture contrast. The fried pasta stayed crunchy even in the broth. It was a dish that showed you didn't need meat to make something feel luxurious. Pasta con le sarde, the Sicilian dish that turned 10-cent cans of sardines into something that tasted like the Mediterranean coast. Giuseppina Vitale made this every Sunday in her kitchen on Mott Street in 1908. She fed 6 people for 40 cents. The recipe came from Palermo, where her family made it with fresh sardines caught that morning. In New York, she used canned sardines and wild fennel she gathered from empty lots in the Bronx. You boiled the fennel fronds until tender and saved the water. You sautéed onions in olive oil, added raisins, pine nuts if you could afford them, and a small can of tomato paste. You added the sardines and broke them up with a wooden spoon. You cooked half a pound of bucatini in the fennel water. You tossed everything together with the sardine sauce and topped it with toasted breadcrumbs fried in oil. What made pasta con le sarde particularly meaningful was that it connected immigrants to the sea they'd crossed. Every bite tasted like Sicily. It proved you could recreate home with American ingredients. Piselli, the buckwheat pasta from the Alps that northern Italian immigrants made in the winter when wheat was too expensive. Angelo Colombo brought this recipe from Valtellina to New York's East Harlem in 1895. He made it throughout the winter months, feeding his family of 7 for 28 cents per meal. You made the pasta dough from half buckwheat flour and half regular flour, rolled it thick, and cut it into wide ribbons. You boiled cubed potatoes and shredded cabbage in salted water. You added the fresh pasta and cooked it for just 5 minutes. You layered everything in a baking dish with sliced onions that you'd fried in butter and whatever cheese you could afford, usually a hard grating cheese. You baked it until the cheese melted and the top turned golden. What made Ciceri particularly important was that it showed the diversity of Italian immigration. Not everyone came from the South. Not everyone made tomato sauce. This was mountain food, peasant food, the kind of dish that sustained families through alpine winters and New York blizzards alike. Pasta e ceci, the Roman dish that became the weeknight staple of every Italian family in Philadelphia's South 9th Street by 1910. Rosa Benedetti made this every Wednesday night, feeding 9 people for 18 cents. Her recipe came from Lazio, passed down from her grandmother who made it during the papal food shortages. You soaked chickpeas overnight, then boiled them with a whole onion, garlic cloves, and a sprig of rosemary until they were completely tender. You removed half the chickpeas and mashed them into a paste. You put the mashed chickpeas back into the pot with the whole ones. You added small pasta, usually ditalini or broken spaghetti. You cooked everything together until the pasta was done and the whole thing became thick and creamy from the chickpea starch. What made pasta e ceci particularly beloved was its simplicity. You could make it with pantry staples. You could make it on the coldest nights. You could serve it as soup or let it thicken into something you ate with a fork. It refrigerated beautifully and tasted even better the next day, reheated in a pan with a little olive oil. And you're starting to see the pattern. These weren't the pasta dishes that made it into American cookbooks. They required no special ingredients, no elaborate techniques. The pasta your great-grandmother made when the garden gave her 3 zucchini and half an onion. 25 more are waiting. Each one vanished from American tables. Let's continue. Pasta alla norma, the Sicilian dish named after an opera that became the summer staple of every family in Brooklyn's Bensonhurst by 1915. Carmela Russo made this every August when eggplants were cheap and plentiful at the Arthur Avenue Market. She fed 8 people for 35 cents. The recipe honored the composer Vincenzo Bellini, a Sicilian like her, whose opera Norma premiered in 1831. You sliced 2 large eggplants, salted them heavily, and let them drain for an hour to remove the bitterness. You fried the eggplant slices in olive oil until they were golden brown on both sides. You made a simple tomato sauce with canned tomatoes, garlic, and basil. You cooked a pound of rigatoni until it was perfectly al dente. You tossed the pasta with the tomato sauce, layered in the fried eggplant, and topped everything with ricotta salata, a firm, salty sheep's milk cheese that you grated over the top. What made pasta alla norma particularly significant was that it represented the height of Sicilian summer cooking. Eggplants were the vegetable of poor families because they grew abundantly and cost almost nothing. But when you fried them properly, when you combined them with sweet tomato sauce and salty cheese, they became something that tasted expensive. The dish taught immigrant children that poverty and pride could exist in the same pot. You stored leftovers in the icebox for up to 2 days, though the eggplant lost its crispness. Pasta e fagioli, the dish that every single Italian immigrant family made at least once a week, regardless of which region they came from. Giovanni Moretti made this every Thursday night at his tenement on Hester Street in 1902. He fed 10 people for 22 cents. His version came from Abruzzo, though every region of Italy had its own variation. You soaked dried cannellini beans overnight in cold water. You boiled them with water, a ham bone if you had one, or just a piece of pork rind if you didn't, along with a whole onion, celery, and carrot. You cooked the beans until they were completely tender, which took about 90 minutes. You removed the vegetables and the bone. You mashed half the beans against the side of the pot with a wooden spoon. You added small pasta, usually ditalini or tubatini. You cooked everything together until the pasta was done, and the whole thing became thick and hearty. What made pasta e fagioli particularly essential was its flexibility. You could make it thick like a stew or thin like a soup, depending on how much water you added. You could make it with fresh beans in the summer or dried beans in the winter. You could add tomatoes if you had them, or leave them out if you didn't. The dish appeared in the Italian-American cookbook published by the Sons of Italy in 1922. But by then it had already been feeding immigrant families for 40 years. You could refrigerate it for up to 4 days, and it tasted better each time you reheated it. Pasta with broccoli rabe, orecchiette con cime di rapa. The Puglian dish that used the bitter greens Italian immigrants found growing wild in American vacant lots. Teresa Lombardi made this every Tuesday night in Boston's North End in 1913. She fed 7 people for 28 cents. The recipe came from Bari, where her family had made it for generations using the tender tops of turnip plants. In America, she discovered that broccoli rabe, which nobody else wanted, tasted almost identical. You made fresh orecchiette pasta by hand, forming each piece by dragging a small ball of dough across a wooden board with your thumb. To create the characteristic ear shape, you blanched 2 bunches of broccoli rabe in boiling salted water until it was just tender. You saved the cooking water. You sautéed sliced garlic and red pepper flakes in olive oil. You added the blanched broccoli rabe and cooked it until it broke down slightly. You cooked the orecchiette in the reserved broccoli rabe water. You tossed everything together with the greens and their cooking liquid. What made orecchiette con cime di rapa particularly important was that it taught immigrants to forage. Broccoli rabe grew wild in empty lots throughout Italian neighborhoods. You could gather it for free. The bitter taste reminded families of the wild greens they'd eaten in southern Italy during the lean months before harvest. The dish required no cheese, no meat, just pasta and greens and olive oil. You could make a double batch and refrigerate half for up to 3 days. The orecchiette's cup shape caught the chopped greens perfectly, ensuring every bite had pasta and vegetable together. Pasta in the style of the prostitute. Pasta alla puttanesca. The dish with the scandalous name that Neapolitan immigrants made when they needed something fast and flavorful after working 14-hour days. Lucia Ferrara made this at her apartment on Mulberry Street in 1920. She fed 6 people for 42 cents. The name supposedly came from the prostitutes of Naples who needed a quick meal between clients, though nobody knows if that story is true or just colorful folklore. You started with a can of whole tomatoes that you crushed by hand. You sautéed garlic and red pepper flakes in olive oil. You added the tomatoes, a handful of black olives that you'd pitted and chopped, 2 tablespoons of capers rinsed of their salt, and 4 or 5 anchovies that dissolved into the sauce. You let it simmer for just 15 minutes. You cooked a pound of spaghetti and tossed it with the sauce. What made pasta alla puttanesca particularly clever was that every ingredient came from the pantry. Nothing was fresh, nothing spoiled. You could keep canned tomatoes, jarred olives, capers, and anchovies on your shelf for months. When you worked long hours in a garment factory or as a street vendor, you didn't have time to shop every day. You needed meals you could make from what you had on hand. The anchovies gave the sauce a deep, salty complexity that made it taste like you'd been cooking for hours. The dish became popular in Italian restaurants during the 1960s, but immigrant families had been making it since the early 1900s. You could refrigerate leftovers for 3 days, though the pasta absorbed the sauce and became softer. Pasta e lenticchie, the New Year's dish that every Italian family in America ate on January 1st, because lentils meant luck and money in the coming year. Antonio Ricci made this at his home in Chicago's Little Italy on New Year's Day, 1918. He fed 12 people for 38 cents. The tradition came from central Italy, where the shape of lentils resembled coins, and eating them on New Year's was supposed to bring prosperity. You rinsed brown lentils and cooked them in water with a whole onion, carrot, celery stalk, and a bay leaf. You cooked them until they were tender but not mushy, about 35 minutes. You removed the vegetables. You added a can of tomatoes and let it simmer for 10 more minutes. You added small pasta, usually ditalini or broken spaghetti. You cooked everything together until the pasta was done, and the lentils had broken down slightly to thicken the cooking liquid. What made pasta e lenticchie particularly meaningful was its connection to hope. Immigrant families who'd spent the year struggling to make rent, struggling to feed their children, struggling to learn English and find work, ate this dish on January 1st and believed that the next year would be better. The lentils cost almost nothing. A pound of dried lentils was 8 cents in 1918 and would feed a family for 2 meals. The dish appeared in every Italian-American community cookbook published between 1910 and 1950. You made it thick like a stew or thin like a soup, depending on your preference. You could refrigerate it for up to 5 days. The lentils continued to absorb liquid as they sat, so you added water when you reheated it. Some families added a piece of pork rind for flavor, but the dish was just as good without meat. 10 recipes in, and the loss becomes clearer. Every single one of these fed Italian families for generations. 20 recipes remain. Each one represents a specific region, a specific season, a specific problem, solved with flour and water and whatever the land provided that week. None of them survived the convenience revolution. Let's continue. Pasta with garlic and oil, pasta aglio e olio, the simplest pasta dish in existence, the one that immigrant families made at midnight when they came home from working double shifts and needed something fast. Marco Gentile made this at 2 in the morning in his apartment above his cobbler shop on Grand Street in 1912. He fed himself and his brother for 6 cents. The recipe came from Naples, where poor families made it when they had nothing else in the house. You boiled a pound of spaghetti in heavily salted water. While it cooked, you sliced 6 or 7 garlic cloves paper thin. You heated a generous amount of olive oil in a large pan, added the garlic, and cooked it slowly until it turned golden but not brown. You added red pepper flakes if you wanted heat. You drained the pasta, but saved a cup of the cooking water. You tossed the hot pasta in the garlic oil, adding splashes of the pasta water to create a light sauce that coated every strand. What made pasta aglio e olio particularly important was that it proved you didn't need a sauce to make great pasta. You needed good olive oil, fresh garlic, and the starchy pasta water that emulsified everything together. The dish took exactly 15 minutes from start to finish. It cost almost nothing. It filled you up after a long day of physical labor. Italian immigrants who worked as construction workers, longshoremen, or street cleaners often made this at odd hours when they got home too tired to cook anything more complicated. You ate it immediately because it didn't keep well. The garlic oil separated if you tried to refrigerate it, but that was fine because you never had leftovers anyway. The dish appeared in the Italian cookbook published by the Ladies' Auxiliary of the Church of the Most Precious Blood in 1928, though by then families had been making it for decades. Pasta con piselli. The springtime dish that Italian mothers made when fresh peas appeared at the market and their children needed something green and sweet after a winter of dried beans. Filomena Esposito made this every April in her kitchen on Mulberry Street in 1905. She fed 8 people for 32 cents when she used fresh peas, or 20 cents when she used dried peas in the winter. The recipe came from Rome, though every region of Italy had a version. You diced pancetta or salt pork into small pieces and fried it until the fat rendered out. You added diced onion and let it soften in the pork fat. You added fresh peas or dried peas that you'd soaked overnight, along with a little water. You let everything simmer until the peas were tender. You cooked short pasta, usually ditalini or tubettini. You combined the pasta with the peas and their cooking liquid, adding grated cheese if you could afford it. What made pasta con piselli particularly special was that it marked the change of seasons. After months of eating dried beans and preserved vegetables, fresh peas meant spring had arrived. They meant the worst of winter was over. They meant warmer weather and more work and more money coming in. Italian immigrant children loved this dish because the peas were sweet and the pasta was small enough for little hands to eat easily. The dish appeared in the cookbook, published by the Italian Welfare League in 1923. You could make it with frozen peas after frozen vegetables became available in the 1930s, though immigrant grandmothers insisted fresh peas tasted better. You refrigerated leftovers for up to 3 days. The peas released their starch as the dish sat, making it thicker and creamier the next day. Some families added a beaten egg at the end, stirring it into the hot pasta so it created a light, creamy coating. Pasta alla gricia, the Roman dish that was the ancestor of carbonara, made with just pork, cheese, and pasta water. Salvatore Martino made this every Saturday night at his apartment in Philadelphia's Italian Market in 1916. He fed 6 people for 50 cents. The recipe came from the shepherds of Lazio, who made it in the mountains with the ingredients they carried with them: cured pork jowl and aged sheep's milk cheese. In America, most immigrants couldn't find guanciale, so they used pancetta or thick-cut bacon. You cut the pork into small strips and fried it slowly until the fat rendered and the meat turned crispy. You cooked a pound of rigatoni in heavily salted water. You drained the pasta, but saved 2 cups of the cooking water. You tossed the hot pasta with the crispy pork and its rendered fat. You added the pasta water bit by bit, stirring constantly. You added grated pecorino romano cheese and kept stirring until the cheese and pasta water and pork fat emulsified into a creamy sauce that coated every piece of pasta. Pasta e cavolo, the winter dish that used the cheapest vegetable in America to feed families when everything else was too expensive. Giovanna Russo made this 3 times a week during the winter of 1917 in her tenement on Elizabeth Street. She fed 9 people for 18 cents. The recipe came from Campania, where poor families made it during the cold months when nothing else grew. You shredded half a head of green cabbage into thin strips. You boiled it in salted water until it was very tender and sweet. You saved the cooking water. You fried diced onion and garlic in olive oil or lard. You added the cooked cabbage to the onion mixture and let it brown slightly. You cooked short pasta in the cabbage cooking water. You combined everything together, pasta and cabbage and cooking liquid, until the pasta absorbed the sweet cabbage flavor. What made pasta e cavolo particularly important was that it showed how Italian immigrants adapted to American abundance. In Italy, cabbage was a luxury that families could only afford occasionally. In America, cabbage was the cheapest vegetable at every market. A whole head cost 3 cents in 1917. It lasted for weeks in a cold cellar. You could make 5 meals from 1 cabbage. Italian families who'd rarely eaten cabbage in Italy suddenly ate it constantly in America because it was affordable and available year-round. The dish became a staple of Italian-American home cooking, though it never appeared on restaurant menus because Americans didn't think cabbage was fancy enough for Italian food. You could add a piece of pork rind or a ham bone to the cooking water for extra flavor. Pasta al forno, the Sunday dish that Italian families made when they wanted to show off, when they had guests coming, when they wanted to prove they'd made it in America. Rosa Benedetti made this every 3rd Sunday at her home in Baltimore's Little Italy in 1922. She fed 12 people for $1.15, which was expensive but worth it for a special occasion. The recipe came from Naples, where families made it for feast days and celebrations. You made a meat sauce by browning ground beef or pork in olive oil, then simmering it with canned tomatoes, garlic, and basil for at least 2 hours. You cooked a pound of rigatoni or ziti until it was barely done, still quite firm. You made a bechamel sauce by melting butter, whisking in flour, then slowly adding milk until it thickened. You mixed the pasta with the meat sauce. You layered half the sauced pasta in a baking dish. You added slices of mozzarella and spoonfuls of ricotta. You layered the remaining pasta on top. You poured the bechamel over everything. You topped it with grated Parmesan cheese. You baked it at 375 degrees for 45 minutes until the top turned golden and crispy. What made pasta al forno particularly meaningful was that it represented success. Poor immigrant families didn't make baked pasta. They didn't have ovens. They didn't have the money for multiple cheeses and meat sauce. But by the 1920s, some Italian families had moved out of tenements into apartments with real kitchens. They had ovens. They had a little extra money. They could afford to make a dish that required 3 different components and an hour of baking time. The dish showed their American-born children that their parents had climbed out of poverty. It showed their neighbors that they'd made it. You could assemble it the night before and bake it the next day. 15 recipes in, and you're seeing the evolution. The first 10 recipes were pure survival food, the dishes that immigrant families made in tenement kitchens with coal stoves and no money. These next 5 recipes show what happened when those families started to succeed, when they moved into better apartments, when they could afford ovens and multiple ingredients, and the time to cook something more elaborate. Let's keep going. Pasta alla vodka, the dish that everyone thinks was invented in the 1980s but actually appeared in Italian-American restaurants in New York in the late 1950s. Dante Russo first served this at his restaurant on Mulberry Street in 1958. He charged $2.50 per plate, which was expensive for pasta. The recipe was his own invention, created when a customer asked for something different, and he experimented with adding vodka to his tomato cream sauce. You started with a basic tomato sauce made from canned crushed tomatoes, garlic, and olive oil. You let it simmer for 20 minutes. You added half a cup of vodka and let it cook for 5 more minutes to burn off the alcohol. You added heavy cream and stirred until the sauce turned pink and creamy. You added red pepper flakes for heat. You cooked penne pasta and tossed it with the sauce. You topped it with grated Parmesan and fresh basil. What made pasta alla vodka particularly interesting was that it represented the complete Americanization of Italian food. No one in Italy made this dish. No Italian grandmother had a recipe for it. It was created in America by an Italian-American chef who was trying to appeal to American customers who wanted Italian food that tasted rich and creamy and a little bit fancy. The vodka didn't add much flavor, but it helped the tomato sauce and cream emulsify together smoothly. It also gave the dish a name that sounded sophisticated and modern. By the 1970s, every Italian restaurant in America had pasta alla vodka on their menu. By the 1980s, it had become so popular that people forgot it was invented in America and started claiming it was an authentic Italian dish. You could make the sauce ahead and refrigerate it for up to 3 days. You reheated it gently and added a splash of cream if it seemed too thick. The dish became even more popular in the 1990s when Carbone restaurant in New York made their version famous, charging $28 for a plate of pasta that cost about $3 to make. Pasta primavera, the dish that was invented at Le Cirque restaurant in New York in 1975 and became so popular that within 5 years every Italian restaurant in America was serving it. Ciceri Macchioni, the owner of Le Cirque, created this dish when he came back from a vacation in Italy and wanted something light and fresh for the spring menu. He charged $12 per plate in 1975, which was outrageous for pasta with vegetables. You sautéed a mixture of spring vegetables in olive oil and butter, asparagus cut into pieces, zucchini sliced thin, cherry tomatoes halved, fresh peas, broccoli florets. You cooked them until they were just tender but still bright green. You added minced garlic and let it cook for 30 seconds. You cooked a pound of fettuccine. You tossed the hot pasta with the vegetables. You added heavy cream and grated Parmesan cheese. You tossed everything together until the cream and cheese created a light sauce that coated the pasta and vegetables. What made pasta primavera particularly significant was that it showed how Italian-American food had completely separated from Italian food by the 1970s. No one in Italy made pasta with cream and mixed vegetables. Italian cooking was regional and specific. You didn't mix vegetables from different seasons. You didn't add cream to vegetable pasta. But American customers wanted Italian food that felt healthy and fresh and colorful. They wanted lots of vegetables. They wanted cream sauce. They wanted something that looked beautiful on the plate. Pasta primavera gave them all of that. The dish appeared in the New York Times in 1977, and suddenly every home cook in America was making it. Cookbooks published between 1978 and 1985 all included pasta primavera recipes, usually with slightly different vegetables depending on what was available. You could make it with any combination of spring or summer vegetables. You could leave out the cream and just use olive oil for a lighter version. You refrigerated leftovers for up to 3 days, though the vegetables lost their bright color and the pasta absorbed most of the sauce. By the 1990s, the dish had become so common that it was no longer considered special, and upscale Italian restaurants stopped serving it. Pasta pesto, the Ligurian sauce that almost no Italian immigrants made until the 1960s when Americans discovered it, and it became one of the most popular pasta sauces in the country. Traditional pesto came from Genoa, where families made it by hand in a marble mortar, crushing fresh basil leaves with garlic, pine nuts, Parmesan cheese, and olive oil. But very few immigrants from Liguria came to America compared to immigrants from southern Italy. The dish didn't appear in Italian-American cooking until after World War II, when American soldiers who'd been stationed in northern Italy came home talking about this bright green sauce they'd eaten. By the 1960s, a few Italian restaurants in New York and San Francisco were serving it. By the 1970s, you could buy jarred pesto in specialty stores. You made it by putting 2 cups of fresh basil leaves in a blender or food processor with 3 cloves of garlic, a 1/4 cup of pine nuts, 1/2 cup of grated Parmesan cheese, and 1/2 cup of olive oil. You blended everything until it was smooth and bright green. You cooked a pound of linguine or trinette. You tossed the hot pasta with the pesto, adding a little pasta cooking water to thin the sauce if needed. What made pasta pesto particularly interesting was that it became popular in America before it became popular throughout Italy. In the 1960s and 70s, pesto was still a regional specialty in Liguria. Most Italians in other regions had never eaten it, but Americans loved it because it was bright green and fresh tasting and seemed healthy. It became one of the first Italian dishes that Americans learned about from restaurants rather than from their immigrant grandmothers. The dish appeared in American cookbooks before it appeared in most Italian cookbooks. You could make the pesto ahead and store it in the refrigerator for up to a week if you poured a thin layer of olive oil on top to prevent it from turning brown. You could freeze it for up to 3 months. By the 1980s, pesto had become so popular that food companies started making dried pesto mix and pesto-flavored everything. The original dish from Genoa, made by hand in a mortar, became almost impossible to find even in Italian restaurants. Pasta e broccoli, the dish that Italian immigrants created in America because broccoli was cheap and plentiful here in a way it never was in Italy. Broccoli wasn't a common vegetable in southern Italy, where most immigrants came from. It grew in central Italy, but poor families couldn't afford it often. In America, Italian immigrants discovered that broccoli grew abundantly and cost almost nothing at markets. By 1920, they were eating more broccoli in America than they'd ever eaten in Italy. Anna Ferraro made pasta e broccoli twice a week at her home in Providence, Rhode Island, in 1925. She fed 7 people for 25 cents. You cut a large head of broccoli into florets and boiled them in salted water until they were very tender. You saved the cooking water. You sautéed sliced garlic and red pepper flakes in olive oil. You added the cooked broccoli to the garlic oil and broke it up with a wooden spoon until it almost became a chunky sauce. You cooked short pasta, usually orecchiette or shells, in the broccoli cooking water. You tossed everything together with the broccoli mixture, adding splashes of the cooking water to create a light sauce. What made pasta a broccoli particularly important was that it showed how immigration changed Italian food from both directions. Italians brought their recipes to America and adapted them to American ingredients. But they also sent those adapted recipes back to Italy in letters to their families. By the 1950s, pasta e broccoli had become common in Italy, especially in regions where it had never been eaten before, because immigrants had written home about this cheap, delicious vegetable they'd discovered in America. The dish appeared in Italian-American cookbooks throughout the 1930s and 40s. You could add anchovies to the garlic oil for extra flavor. You could top it with breadcrumbs toasted in olive oil for texture. You could add a squeeze of lemon juice at the end for brightness. You refrigerated leftovers for up to 3 days. The broccoli continued to break down as it sat, making the dish more like a sauce and less like pasta with vegetables. Some families added white beans to make it more substantial, creating a dish that was filling enough to serve as a complete meal. Pasta alla carbonara, the dish that everyone thinks is ancient Roman food, but was actually invented in the 1940s, possibly by Italian-Americans, possibly by Italians, and definitely influenced by American bacon and eggs. The origin story is disputed. Some say Italian carbonari, charcoal workers, invented it. Some say it was created in Rome after World War II, when American soldiers shared their bacon and egg rations with hungry Italians. Some say Italian-American soldiers brought the technique back from America, where they'd been making pasta with bacon and eggs since the 1920s. What's certain is that the dish didn't appear in any Italian cookbook before 1950. Regardless of who invented it, by 1955, every Italian restaurant in New York was serving it. You fried thick-cut bacon or pancetta until crispy. You beat eggs with grated Parmesan and pecorino cheese and black pepper. You cooked a pound of spaghetti. You tossed the hot pasta with the crispy bacon and its rendered fat. You removed the pan from the heat and added the egg mixture, stirring constantly so the eggs cooked from the heat of the pasta but didn't scramble. You added pasta cooking water bit by bit to create a creamy sauce that coated every strand of spaghetti. What made pasta alla carbonara particularly controversial was that it became one of the most famous Italian dishes in the world, even though its origins were unclear and possibly American. Italian food purists argued about the correct recipe constantly. Some said you must use guanciale, not bacon. Some said you must use only pecorino, not Parmesan. Some said you must never add cream, though many restaurants did. The arguments became so intense that by the 2000s, carbonara had become a symbol of the fight between traditional Italian cooking and Italian-American cooking. But in the 1950s and 60s, nobody cared about authenticity. They just knew it tasted incredible. The combination of salty pork, creamy eggs, sharp cheese, and black pepper created something that felt both simple and luxurious. You had to serve it immediately because the eggs continued to cook, and the sauce thickened as it sat. You couldn't really refrigerate leftovers because the eggs became rubbery. The dish appeared in American cookbooks throughout the 1960s, usually with cream added to make the sauce more stable and easier for home cooks to make without scrambling the eggs.
Hello, Brad.
Hello! Come to York and get a lot more lunch for a lot less money.
Never seen a place like showbiz people.
Remember Woolworths, where a quick bite felt like a treat? Or B. Dalton, the book haven for readers everywhere? What about the vibrant merry-go-round, the ultimate fashion stop for teens? These as we look at 25 forgotten mall stores that no longer exist today. Woolworths was established in 1879 by Frank Winfield Woolworth as one of the first five and dime stores. It became a cultural phenomenon when it introduced its iconic lunch counters in the 1920s. These counters served classic American meals like sandwiches, pies, and milkshakes, making them a go-to spot for a quick, affordable meal. People love gathering there for casual meals.
We're working hard to give our customers the most efficient checkout experience they can. No more barriers, opening up the entry to our store and providing access to our fresh food department. The smaller 100-litre trolley, this is what our customers are looking for.
And it became a vital part of the shopping experience. By the 1960s, Woolworths was thriving in malls across the country. However, as fast food chains gained popularity and consumer habits shifted, Woolworths couldn't keep up. The chain began losing relevance and struggled financially. By 1997, it closed its remaining stores, marking the end of an era. Despite its closure, Woolworths lunch counters are remembered as a piece of American retail history. So, how did a mail-order catalog turn into one of the most popular mall stores? Let's find out. Montgomery Ward started in 1872 when Aaron Montgomery Ward introduced the revolutionary idea of mail-order shopping for rural Americans. By 1926, the company opened its first retail store, blending shopping with dining in its in-store food courts. These courts served affordable meals to busy shoppers, becoming a staple in malls by the mid-20th century.
Fight high food prices with Ward's Deluxe Upright and Chest Freezers, now $40 off, with adjustable cold control, safety locks, and removable baskets.
Montgomery Ward was beloved for its wide selection of products and convenient dining options. However, the rise of discount giants like Walmart stopped producing its iconic catalogs in 1985 and eventually filed for bankruptcy in 1997. By the late 1990s, all stores had closed. Today, Montgomery Ward survives as an online brand, but its food courts and mall stores remain a nostalgic memory for many. KB Toys, originally called Kaufman Brothers, was founded in 1922. It started as a candy business, but shifted to toys in the 1940s. By 1959, its first toy store opened in Connecticut, and it became a must-visit spot for families in malls across the U.S. KB Toys was famous for its bright displays and shelves filled with the latest action figures, dolls, and board games.
Tired of all the noisy and bright plastic toys your child is so fond of? Is the Pokemon craze making you crazy? Looking for a toy that will work even if the power does go out on December 31st? Well, how about buying some of the classic toys, the ones that you played with as a child? They're still popular today and probably will be way into the millennium.
It brought joy to countless children and was often the highlight of mall trips. However, by the early 2000s, competition from larger stores like Walmart and the rise of online shopping hurt its sales. KB Toys filed for bankruptcy in 2000. Memory lives on in the hearts of those who grew up shopping there. What made Kinney Shoes the go-to spot for affordable footwear in its prime? Let's take a walk through its story. Kinney Shoes was founded in 1894 by George Ramonta Kinney to provide affordable footwear to working-class families. By the 1920s, it had expanded to hundreds of locations. It became a prominent name in malls during the 1960s when Woolworth purchased the brand. Kinney Shoes was known for its blend of quality and affordability, offering everything from casual shoes to athletic footwear. In the 1970s, it launched Foot Locker as a subsidiary, catering to the growing demand for athletic shoes.
Fellow Americans, stop dragging your feet. Wear Kinneys when you're going to go out on a date.
Look great.
But do you know your feet need a little love?
Kinney knows.
What an agonizing, enterprising, hard kind of day you spend working overtime. You!
Bib, it's small.
You! When you
shop.
You need shoes for it all. I say comfort and stuff.
Despite its early success, competition from emerging discount and specialty stores began to take its toll. Declining sales and shifting consumer preferences led to the closure of all Kinney Shoe stores by 1998. Though gone, it's remembered as a pioneer in affordable and accessible footwear. G.C. Murphy was established in 1906 by George Clinton Murphy in Pennsylvania. Known for its five and dime concept, the store quickly grew into a beloved chain. Its in-store lunch counters, offering hot dogs, burgers, and soda at budget-friendly prices, were especially popular during the Great Depression. These counters provided affordable meals for families while also serving as social hubs. By the 1970s, G.C. Murphy operated over 500 stores, many of which were in malls. However, changing retail trends and increasing competition from larger discount stores created challenges. In 1985, it was sold to Ames department stores, and by 2002, all locations low-priced, family-friendly offerings. Love books? This store was every reader's dream come true. Let's flip through the pages of B. Dalton. B. Dalton Bookseller opened in 1966, bringing a cozy and exciting bookstore vibe to malls. Founded by Bruce Dayton, it quickly became the go-to spot for readers craving the latest hardcover and paperback releases. With over 700 stores at its peak, it created a perfect escape for book lovers in bustling malls. People love browsing its shelves, finding everything from bestsellers to niche gems. But as big box stores and online retailers rose, B. Dalton struggled to keep up. By 2010, the last stores closed, leaving behind cherished memories of leisurely mall trips filled with books and coffee.
Till the real thing comes along. A novel by Iris Rayner Dart about a woman who'd stopped hoping for a happy ending, but found one anyway. For him, Stephen Sommers' Favorite Son, a political thriller that opens explosively on the Capitol steps and never lets up.
Walden Books was established in 1962 and was a mall favorite for bookworms. With its first store in Pittsburgh, it became a pioneer in accessible book retail. Offering everything from novels to school supplies, Walden Books made reading cool and convenient. Its preferred reader program, Loyalty Program, became a hit with frequent shoppers. By the 1980s, it had over 1,000 stores, making it a literary hub. However, rising competition from superstores and the digital age led to its decline. By 2011, the chain was history, but its name still brings a smile to those who grew up browsing its aisles. Teens adored its bold style and lively vibe. So, why did merry-go-round's ride come to an end? Let's see. Merry-go-round was the ultimate fashion destination for teens in the 1980s. It was founded in 1979 and specialized with popular brands like Z Cavarici, making it the coolest spot of them all. Its flashy ads and loud music added to the energy, creating a shopping experience. However, the store failed to evolve with changing trends. By the mid-1990s, it faced bankruptcy, and in 1996, the ride was over. Still, it remains an unforgettable slice of mall culture for those who shop there. Chess King launched in 1968, catering to young men looking for bold, trendy styles. Known for its bright colors and cutting-edge designs, it was a fashion hotspot in malls across America. Guys from the ages of 12 to 20 loved the mix of casual and flashy, with Chess King defining 1980s youth culture. But as trends shifted in the 1990s, its appeal faded. New ownership under Merry-Go-Round couldn't save it, and by 1995, Chess King was no more. Despite its closure, it's fondly remembered as where many young men found their first cool outfits. Remember browsing for CDs and discovering new music? Let's rewind to the days of Camelot Music. Camelot Music, founded in 1965, was a music lover's paradise. Located in malls, it sold vinyl records, cassettes, and CDs, drawing crowds with its electric atmosphere. Customers loved flipping through albums and discovering new artists. In the 1980s, it had nearly 300 stores and was a leader in music retail. But the digital music wave hit hard, and Camelot couldn't keep pace. After merging with other brands, most locations were rebranded or closed by the early 2000s. For those who spent hours browsing Camelot's aisles, it remains a cherished memory of music discovery. Sam Goody launched in 1951 in Manhattan, selling records and quickly becoming a music retail giant. Its stores, often found in
the dish that Italian restaurants in Italy created in the 1980s to serve to American tourists who wanted Italian food that tasted like Italian-American food. This is where the story gets circular and strange. By the 1980s, millions of Americans were traveling to Italy. They went to Italian restaurants expecting to find the food they'd grown up eating in Italian-American restaurants. They ordered spaghetti and meatballs and were told it didn't exist. They ordered fettuccine alfredo with cream and were served butter and cheese instead. They were confused and disappointed. So some Italian restaurants, especially in tourist areas like Rome and Florence, started making American-style Italian food. They created pasta alla americana, which was essentially pasta with a meat sauce that was heavier and more tomato-based than traditional bolognese, but lighter than Italian-American meat sauce. They made it by browning ground beef with onions and garlic. They added canned tomatoes, tomato paste, and dried herbs. They simmered it for about an hour. They served it over spaghetti with grated Parmesan on top. What made pasta alla americana particularly fascinating was that it represented Italian food imitating Italian-American food. The circle was complete. Italian immigrants had come to America and adapted their recipes to American ingredients and tastes. Those adapted recipes became Italian-American cuisine. Italian-American cuisine became so popular in America that when Americans traveled to Italy, they expected to find it there, and Italian restaurants adapted to meet those expectations by creating dishes that mimicked Italian-American dishes. Food historians call this culinary feedback loop. The dish appeared on menus in tourist areas throughout Italy in the 1980s and 90s. Pasta con pollo e broccoli. The dish that appeared on every Italian-American restaurant menu in the 1990s when Americans decided they wanted healthier Italian food with chicken and vegetables. Traditional Italian cooking rarely combined chicken with pasta. Chicken was expensive and usually roasted whole and served as a separate course. But by the 1990s, American customers wanted lighter Italian food. They wanted protein and vegetables together. They wanted something that felt healthy but still tasted indulgent. Italian-American restaurants responded by creating chicken and broccoli pasta dishes. Marco Gentile started serving his version at his restaurant in Philadelphia in 1992. He charged $12.95 per plate. You cut boneless chicken breasts into bite-sized pieces and seasoned them with salt, pepper, and Italian seasoning. You sautéed them in olive oil until golden and cooked through. You removed the chicken and set it aside. You blanched broccoli florets in boiling water until just tender. You sautéed garlic in the same pan you'd cooked the chicken in. You added the broccoli and tossed it in the garlic oil. You added the chicken back to the pan. You cooked penne or rigatoni. You tossed everything together with a light sauce made from olive oil, butter, chicken broth, and grated Parmesan cheese. What made this dish particularly representative of 1990s food culture was that it reflected America's obsession with health food that didn't actually taste like health food. Customers wanted to feel like they were making a healthy choice by ordering chicken and broccoli, but they also wanted butter and cheese and enough calories to feel satisfied. Pasta alla Toscana, the dish that American chain restaurants invented in the 2000s by throwing together ingredients that sounded Italian and Tuscan without any connection to actual Tuscan cooking. Real Tuscan pasta dishes were simple and regional: peachy with garlic and breadcrumbs, pappardelle with wild boar sauce, pasta with beans and sage. But American restaurants wanted something that sounded sophisticated and Italian while appealing to American tastes. They created Tuscan dishes that had nothing to do with Tuscany. The most famous was the Olive Garden's Tuscan garlic chicken, which inspired countless pasta variations at other restaurants. A typical pasta alla Toscana, served at dozens of chain restaurants by 2005, was made by sautéing chicken pieces in olive oil. You removed the chicken and added sliced mushrooms and sun-dried tomatoes to the same pan. You added minced garlic and let it cook for 30 seconds. You added heavy cream, chicken broth, and Italian seasoning. You added fresh spinach and let it wilt in the cream sauce. You added the chicken back to the pan. You cooked penne or bow tie pasta. You tossed everything together and topped it with grated Parmesan cheese. What made pasta alla Toscana particularly emblematic of modern Italian-American food was that it had completely abandoned any pretense of authenticity. It wasn't trying to recreate Italian food or even Italian-American food. It was creating a new category: American food with Italian-sounding names. Pasta al telefono. The mozzarella-filled baked pasta that got its name from the long strings of cheese that stretched between your fork and your mouth like telephone wires. The dish originated in Naples, where it was called macaroni al telefono and was made with fresh mozzarella and simple tomato sauce. But Italian-Americans transformed it into something much more elaborate. By the 1970s, it had become a special occasion dish that families made for holidays and celebrations. Rosa Martino made her version for Christmas Eve dinner in Boston in 1978. She fed 15 people for $8. You cooked a pound of rigatoni or penne until it was barely done, still quite firm. You made a rich tomato sauce with ground beef, Italian sausage, garlic, and canned tomatoes, simmering it for at least 2 hours. You cut fresh mozzarella into small cubes. You mixed the pasta with the meat sauce. You stirred in half the mozzarella cubes, saving the rest for the top. You poured everything into a large baking dish. You covered the top with the remaining mozzarella cubes and grated Parmesan cheese. You baked it at 375 degrees for 35 minutes until the cheese on top melted and turned golden and the mozzarella inside became stretchy and stringy. What made pasta al telefono particularly beloved was the drama of serving it. When you scooped a portion onto someone's plate, long strings of melted mozzarella stretched from the baking dish to the plate, sometimes 2 or 3 feet long, looking like telephone wires. Children loved it. Adults loved it. Everyone at the table would watch as you served each portion, waiting to see how long the cheese strings would stretch before they finally broke. Pasta alla ruota. The dish that became Instagram famous in the 2010s when Italian restaurants started tossing fresh pasta in hollowed-out wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. The technique came from Italy, specifically from Emilia-Romagna, where cheesemakers would sometimes toss pasta in the hollow rind of a cheese wheel to impress visitors. But it was rare, done only for special demonstrations. Italian-American restaurants transformed it into a regular menu item and a theatrical tableside service. By 2015, upscale Italian restaurants in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami were offering it as their signature dish. They charged $35 to $50 per plate. The preparation was simple but dramatic. You hollowed out a wheel of aged Parmigiano Reggiano cheese, leaving the rind intact, to form a bowl. You heated the cheese wheel slightly with a torch or in a warm oven so the inside surface became soft and melty. You cooked fresh fettuccine or tagliatelle. A server brought the cheese wheel to your table, added butter and cream, and kept tossing until the pasta was coated in a thick, creamy cheese sauce. They plated it at your table with black pepper on top. What made pasta alla ruota particularly significant was that it represented the final evolution of Italian-American food, from poverty food to Instagram content. This wasn't food that immigrants made to survive. This wasn't food that showed you'd climbed out of poverty. Your grandmother is still waiting. She's waiting for you to learn these recipes. She's waiting for you to make pasta e patate on a Monday night. the way her grandmother made it in 1903, and remember that your family survived poverty and immigration and built a life in America one bowl of pasta at a time. Go make these dishes. Go preserve this history. Go honor your grandmother before she's gone. She's waiting.